Part 6. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 51. Watch out. Ning Qingyi swooped down from above like a falcon attacking a rabbit. Due to the angle of view, the two wolf guards watching from a distance were the first to see the movement. Their expressions suddenly changed and they shouted. Although Zhang Xiang, who was holding the knife and raising his hand, did not see any movement above him, he came over to investigate the abnormality. He was already on guard. Before the sudden explosion from above, he sensed something was wrong and leaned back to dodge without hesitation. Ning Qingyi took her feet off the two green bamboos, and the bamboos returned to their original straightness. At the same time, she pulled the iron wire buried in the snow. She only heard a soft click sound, and the sound of breaking wind sounded in the distance. Dozens of them, the sharpened bamboo shot out like sharp arrows, piercing the paths that the wolf guard might have walked. Whispering, rustling. The two wolf guards quickly dodged and blocked, unable to throw their sabers to rescue them for a while. Everything happened simultaneously, in the blink of an eye. Zhang Xiang had no time to turn around and draw the sword. The blade of the sword almost brushed his forehead. The next moment, the blade reached his chest. If he didn't block it, he would be stabbed through the heart. As a tycoon who has been in the world all his life, Zhang Xiang didn't even have panic in his eyes, and even had a bit of contempt in his eyes. Without hesitation, he let go of the Yanling saber, clasped his hands together like iron pliers to clamp the blade, and fell down to relieve his strength. Ning Qingyi dropped a sword from the sky and stabbed it down. After Zhang Xiang clamped the blade with both hands, it was like a ball of cotton stabbed into the sword. He didn't even have a chance to move in the air, and fell straight to the ground. While Zhang Xiang held the sword blade in both hands and fell back to the ground, he kicked his right foot upwards as fast as a golden hook hanging upside down. The boots drove the hem of the official robe, and there was a muffled sound all over his body. The force of this kick would probably result in it being torn apart even if it hit a stone. The masters exchanged blows, and the victory or defeat was decided in the blink of an eye. The two sides were too different to be opponents of the same weight. Ning Qingyi's eyes showed a bit of astonishment. At the critical moment, she forcibly twisted the blade, forcing Zhang Xiang to release his closed hands, and at the same time blocked the incoming boot with his left arm. Bang! A muffled sound came from the bamboo forest. Ning Qingyi, who was wearing a bamboo leaf coir raincoat, was kicked out more than 2 feet like a kite with its string broken, and slid out of a groove in the snow. She didn't stop until she hit a bamboo and let out a sound. A dull groan. Until this moment, Zhang Xiang's sword had not yet hit the ground, and the bamboo pole that was shot at the wolf guard was still in the air. Xiaoting still raised the sword, with a look of confusion in his eyes. In one fight, Ning Qingyi spent almost all his life's learning, but Zhang Xiang can sit in the intelligence agency of an empire, so how can he be a person in vain? As long as Zhang Xiang catches the knife and stands up, Ning Qingyi will basically be unable to escape. Zhang Xiang has been catching Jianghu people all his life, and he will not give any chance. His shoulders shook the ground lightly, and he stood up again. At the same time, he raised his hand to catch the falling saber, but the knife is missing. Zhang Xiang's eyes were on Ning Qingyi. He raised his hand to grab something in the air, and was slightly startled. My knife? Looking around in a blink of an eye, I realized that Prince Su was like a dragon. He rushed forward with a long stride, caught his sword, and rushed towards the charlatan. You damn dare to come here. Last time I kidnapped me, I didn't ask you to settle the account. Let's see where you run this time. The blade of the sword was unsheathed, and the 4-foot blade was filled with cold light. Su Buling first held the knife and walked 3 steps, then turned and swept the knife across. The green bamboo broke silently wherever it passed, and the cut was as smooth as a mirror. It's a good way to get into the sea. Zhang Xiang stood up, but he didn't care about the gangster. He loved swords so much, but he was quite surprised by the sword technique. Su Buling used the Bagua Dao created by Zhang Xiang. It is famous for its continuous and ever-changing skills. It is Zhang Xiang's famous stunt. He has also had several apprentices, but he can do it so well, except for him. In addition, Su Buling is the second one. Zhang Xiang was dissatisfied that he was secretly learned the stunt that made him famous but did not become a disciple. However, the other party was the eldest son of a different surnamed Wang after all, so he could not say anything after learning it, and could only praise it casually. Pieces of green bamboo were cut off, and with the sound of branches and leaves breaking, snow and bamboo leaves fell like an avalanche, blocking the view. Only then did Xiao Ting react. Ah, he screamed, turned around and ran away holding his head. Zhang Xiang looked around and shouted, "Protect young Master Xiao," then he rushed out with his bare hands. His arms were like steel whips. When they hit the fallen bamboo pole, they fell apart, and he rushed out of the bamboo sea. "Come!" And the other side. Su Buling danced wildly with his knife and cut into pieces of bamboo forest, threw him down in front of Ning Qingyi, raised his hand and slashed down with the knife. Ning Qingyi's left arm was almost unconscious. She had not recovered from the fall. Sensing the crisis, she instinctively raised her hand and stabbed Su Buling's throat with the sword. Su Buling was startled and glared at the confused Ning Qingyi angrily. After hearing the footsteps behind him, he changed his tactics to a lying knife and lay down directly. Su Buling is a vassal king, and he and the Song family have never been monolithic. When he enters the capital, he is also a proton and may die suddenly at any time. The detective department secretly monitors the princes and generals, and there are many secret confrontations between them. Compared with the emperor's loyal dog, Ning Qingyi, who is obviously useful, is more important. Needless to say, how to choose. Zhang Xiang rushed quickly behind Su Buling, his side blocked by Su Buling's body. Su Buling suddenly lay down, and the sword blade came directly in front of him. Zhang Xiang, who had been licking blood around the blade of a knife all his life, was so frightened that his pupils shrank. He stopped in a hurry, groaned and forced his knees to turn his head away, almost breaking his neck. Only then did Ning Qingyi react. She jumped up from the ground like a snake, raised her sword and stabbed Zhang Xiang again. Zhang Xiang was unarmed and was at a disadvantage facing Ning Qingyi. Su Buling, who was holding his knife, performed a variety of knife techniques on the spot, leaving no grass behind. As the saying goes, swords have no eyes. Zhang Xiang cherishes his life after all. If he rushed into the swords, he would be killed by the assassin or injured by Su Buling. He had to kick the ground with his feet and slide back, shouting, "Su Shizi, be careful, retreat quickly and throw the knife to me. Leave it to me. You are just a gangster, what's there to fear with a knife in my hand?" Su Buling was famous for his belligerence and recklessness. There was no sense of disobedience in saying this. Zhang Xiang was speechless for a while and could only watch. Ning Qingyi knew that he was no match for him, so he didn't dare to stay for long. After symbolically fighting Su Buling with a set of love sword, he used his chest to receive Su Buling sticking to the mountain, and the whole person crashed directly into the bamboo forest with full elasticity. "Don't run away, thief!" Su Buling was about to chase him with a knife in hand, but Zhang Xiang didn't dare to let the eldest son of the Xiao and Su families mess around here, so he stepped forward to block Su Buling's way. "Prince, calm down, I will chase him." Su Buling seemed to be angry, and his face quickly turned purple. When he was blocked, he angrily stuck the knife into the ground. "Bring my wine." Zhang Xiang knew that Su Buling's dragon-locking cup was powerful, and his status was much lower than Su Buling's, so it was naturally difficult to refuse. He quickly ran to the horse and took down the wine gourd. Although it was only a few steps, there was no sound of thieves in the bamboo forest between the two sides. It will be strongly recommended at 12 noon tomorrow, and the big guys will vote for it. And the big guys of QQ reading and WeChat reading, please come to Kidian to support it. Only the main site counts the data. Thank you. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 52. There was an encounter in the bamboo forest next to Qujiang Pond. It was a near miss. Ning Qingyi failed to assassinate Zhang Xiang and was slightly injured. However, traps and escape routes had been laid out in the bamboo forest in advance. I am afraid he has escaped somewhere now. Recuperate. Su Buletinling just used Ning Qingyi to lure Zhang Xiang out of the Criminal Investigation Department. If Zhang Xiang really died, it would definitely cause an uproar. The current results were still within estimates, but Zhang Xiang's martial arts skills exceeded Su Buletinling's estimates. I'm afraid he is not far different from the one he was in his prime at the age of 15. The main purpose today is to provide cover for Zhu Manzi of the Criminal Investigation Department. With Lao Xiao and 8 dead soldiers on standby around the Criminal Investigation Department, there shouldn't be anything going wrong. The rest will depend on the outcome. From Su Buling's point of view, it was best not to find clues about the Dragon Lock Gu in the detective department, because once found, it would mean that the court had concealed the news about the Dragon Lock Gu, and the meaning of that would be thought-provoking. But before returning to the city to find Zhu Manzi, Su Buling had another unexpected trouble. The sudden assassination in the bamboo forest obviously frightened Xiaoting. He turned around and ran away with his sword. He caught up with the Queen Mother's chariot and shouted something like Su Buletinling has been assassinated. This frightened a bunch of women. Mrs. Lu almost fainted and hurriedly led the Imperial Guards and Wolf Guards to the bamboo forest. Su Buletinling exercised too hard and caused the cold poison to attack. Before he could completely suppress it, he was telling Zhang Xiang to keep quiet when he was bumped into by Mrs. Lu. The result can be imagined. It was past noon, and the fine and dense snowflakes gradually stopped. Several luxurious carriages were parked on the snowfield outside Chang'an City beside the official road. A large group of Imperial Guards and Wolf Guards were guarding the surroundings with their swords on their waists. The caravans were traveling far away. If you are far away, take a detour. In the large carriage, Su Buring was lying on a soft couch, with a hot towel covering his forehead and a thick quilt covering his body. He didn't dare to move even if his forehead was already sweating. Naturally, the Queen Mother took the medical girl with her when traveling, and she was busy massaging and dredging the qi and blood. Mrs. Lu's face turned pale. She sat sideways on the edge of the soft couch, her buttocks pressed against Su Buling's waist. She held his hand and rubbed it back and forth. Her words were very harsh. They all said that you can just go and have a look, and you are not allowed to do anything. It would be better for you to grab Zhang Xiang's knife and join the battle yourself. What is your identity? Prince Su, if you are required to go to the front to kill thieves, you will have to support hundreds of thousands. What are the soldiers doing? Zhang Xiang is useless, even an assassin can't deal with him. There was a bit of irritation in the words, but even the medical woman could hear the distress in them, let alone Su Buling. Su Buling was rubbed for a long time by a pair of soft and boneless hands. The curve of his waist was full of tension. It was very sultry, but it was a bit difficult to resist. After thinking about it, Aunt Lu, I know I was wrong, the assassin tied me up last time, and I couldn't hold it back. Don't you have a long memory of being kidnapped last time? Since they didn't kill you last time, you shouldn't have made enemies with them. Why did you bring the trouble on yourself for the trouble caused by the detective department? Those Jianghu people are already difficult. Tangle, kill one and lead them out, take revenge one after another. Su Buling listened honestly. If he dared to move, he would get a fierce look in his eyes. He could only lie down like a patient and let several medical ladies toss him around. After a short rest, the cold poison in the body has basically been suppressed, but looking at the current situation, don't even think of getting up after returning to the palace. Mrs. Lu taught her words eloquently for a moment, and suddenly there was a sound outside the carriage. "See the Queen Mother." Several medical women quickly bowed their heads and stepped aside, waiting quietly. Mrs. Lu frowned slightly, let go of Su Buling's hand and stood up, making a greeting gesture. "Tread." The door of the large carriage was opened by the palace maid, and the Queen Mother walked in. She was slightly taller and wore a phoenix crown. She leaned slightly and passed through the door of the carriage, holding the hem of her clothes with her hands. Her posture was quite elegant and graceful. Although Mrs. Lu was puzzled by the Queen Mother's uninvited visit, she still bowed out of courtesy. "Queen Mother." "No gift." The Queen Mother entered the carriage, holding a long sword in her hand to illuminate the situation. With a bit of concern in her eyes, she looked at Su Buling, who was sitting on the soft couch. Su Buling came to the capital last year, and it was only a year after all. The Queen Mother had lived in the palace for a long time and did not go out much. In the past, she had only seen her from afar at various celebrations. She was not very familiar with her. This was the first time she was so close. Back. Su Buling was lying on the soft couch. When he saw the Queen Mother, he naturally wanted to stand up and salute. But just as he sat up, Mrs. Lu raised her hand and pressed her back. "You are injured, don't move." Su Buling had no choice but to smile softly. "Queen Mother." The Queen Mother knew that Su Buling was poisoned, so she didn't mind it. She naturally sat down next to the soft couch, put the sword on the small table, and raised her hand to touch Su Buling's wrist. The Xiao family of Huainan, as a powerful official spanning 3 dynasties, was deeply involved in Confucianism and Moism. In fact, Yin Yang and Zhou Yi were also involved in it, and they were quite famous. I dare not comment on metaphysics such as Kimen Bagua, but medical theories such as Yin and Yang Qi are indeed of a high level. People in the Xiao family can basically treat diseases. Xiao Chuang was a county magistrate in the poor mountains and rivers carrying a medicine box, but it is still a matter of fact now. Nice talk. As the legitimate daughter of the Xiao family, the Queen Mother wanted to know more about things. At this time, she also wanted to see how Su Buling was doing. The faint fragrance came to his nose. Looking at the condescending beauty in palace attire, Su Buling felt that he was just like a 7 or 8-year-old kid, and he was really helpless. It's not right to withdraw your hand right now, and it's not right to just wait. Fortunately, Mrs. Lu was standing nearby. When she saw the Queen Mother coming up, she started to move and said with a busy smile, "Your Majesty, the medical lady has just checked your pulse. There is nothing serious." The Queen Mother stretched out her hand halfway, paused when she heard the words, then took it back and smiled sweetly. "I am acquainted with Prince Su and his wife. You have not been to visit me for more than a year since you came to the capital, and I have not invited you to come. You have lost your duty as an elder." Su Buling smiled brightly. "It's because of the poor etiquette of this junior." After entering the capital, he just wandered around and did not visit the Queen Mother in the palace. The Queen Mother should not be overly worried. Su Buling and the Queen Mother have nothing to do with each other. Even their relationship is only nominal, and all they can say are these unnutritious and superficial words. The Queen Mother nodded and smiled, chatting casually for a few words, then looked at the long sword next to her. "Thank you for protecting Xiao Ting in the bamboo forest just now. Xiao Xiang only has 2 sons. If something goes wrong, I, as an aunt, can't bear it. I really have to thank you. Well, if nothing happens the day after tomorrow, come sit in the palace and chat with you about some small things." After Mrs. Lu's reminder, Su Buling naturally knew what was going on and nodded immediately. "I sincerely obey the Queen Mother's decree." When the Queen Mother heard the words "I will obey the Queen Mother's decree," she was stunned for a moment, and then she covered her mouth and let out a series of laughter. Her eyebrows were crooked and her steps were trembling. She was obviously dignified and majestic, but she was inexplicably wearing it. A bit of a bright feeling. Mrs. Lu stood in front of her, turning her head slightly, her eyes a little dissatisfied. The Queen Mother may have felt it was inappropriate, so she stopped laughing and joked, "You kid, you speak very seriously, and you don't look like a young man at all. As an elder, I ask you to go have a meal, and you treat it as a receptionist. If it's a decree, it would be meaningless." Su Buling was just trying to make Mrs. Lu feel more comfortable, so he could only nod his head dully and refuse to answer. The Queen Mother sat for a while and chatted with Mrs. Lu for a few words before getting up and leaving the carriage, letting the honor guard return to the city. The carriage swayed. Mrs. Lu sat down next to Su Buling again, thought for a moment, and glanced at Su Buling. "When you enter the palace the day after tomorrow, you look like this. Don't talk too intimately with the Queen Mother, let alone write poems. The Queen Mother knows that you are civilized and martial. If you have both, others will naturally know." Su Buling chuckled and said, "I'm just a reckless man. I don't know anything about poetry." Mrs. Lu nodded with satisfaction, then took Su Buling's hand and rubbed it, looking out the car window, not knowing what she was thinking about. "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 53. At dusk, the teams that went out to play in the city began to return one after another. Light snow fell on Zuk Street across Chang'an. The Imperial Guards stood on both sides, and the people watched the Queen Mother's chariot slowly walk towards the palace city. Chang'an City has thousands of streets and hundreds of squares, with a population of over 1 million. The common people in the city did not know that there were thieves in Kujiangpool, but the story of Jianghu brave people running to the entrance of the Criminal Investigation Department to curse was talked about by many good people. After all, the detective division is called the Palace of Hell by the people in the world. Countless heroes' stories end with the appearance of the detective division. In modern terms, they are as ruthless characters as the Invincibles of the East. Now, someone actually went to the gate of the Palace of Hell to hum the King of Hell. This courage is so admirable that many officials even talked about it after dinner. However, in the eyes of everyone, this was just a daring gangster who came to make a name for himself. Even if he didn't cause any damage or hurt anyone, it wasn't a big deal just to curse him. After Zhang Xiang went back to the Yamen and inquired about the incident, he just ordered the wolf guards to pull the person out. It was too shameful to be so angry over such a thing, so the top priority was to track down the elusive assassin. Zhang Xiang didn't take this matter seriously, but this little incident didn't end because someone noticed some clues, but failed to report the truth to the superior. At dusk, a fast horse crossed the long street and stopped near the Imperial College. Lu Yunlin, the deputy envoy of the anti-detection department, dismounted in casual clothes, holding a gift box in his hand, and entered a house as if he were coming to say hello. After a while, a salesman carrying a pole appeared in the alley behind the house, and there were products in bamboo baskets. Premium baeksuan from Zuxi. The salesman carried a pole and entered the back door of the Imperial College. He walked through the familiar corridors and came to the outside of a courtyard deep in the Imperial College. He glanced at the guard stationed at the door and entered the elegant house. The house is spacious but has no furnishings. Instead, it is full of peach trees, just like a peach forest. In the heavy snow in winter, only dry peach branches can be seen. There is a painting table in the middle of the peach blossom forest, and a painting hanging on the peach branch in front is a portrait of a woman. Next to the painting table is a bamboo basket filled with crumpled waste paper. Zioxiu Xiao Xiao, Yan Wang Song Yu, dressed in a scholar's robe, held a pen in the peach forest and carefully copied the portrait in front of him. He only painted a few strokes and then stopped, crumpled the paper and threw it into the bamboo basket to paint again. Lu Yunlin put down the pole in the peach blossom forest, did not disturb him, and stood quietly waiting with his head bowed. Song Yu, king of Yan, had extraordinary literary talents since he was a child. His music, chess, calligraphy, and painting were among the best in the world, and his conduct was obvious to all. He was called a contemporary true gentleman by the great Confucian scholars of the Manchu dynasty. When the late emperor passed away 10 years ago, it was supposed to be a battle between two princes, and many ministers supported Song Yu as emperor. But Song Yu only said at that time that Jade's talent is not enough to inherit the throne, so he became an idle prince. He didn't even ask for the fiefdom of Yuzhu, and entered the Imperial Academy as a teacher alone. Year. This is the rumor from the outside world, but how can ordinary people understand the affairs of the emperor's family? At least on the surface, it seems like a happy situation for everyone. Lu Yunlin looked at the scroll hanging on the peach tree. It was well preserved. The ink on the rice paper still looked like it had just been painted. The signature read Su Danking. Regarding Su Danking, Lu Yunlin had been working in the Criminal Investigation Department for so long that he had heard about it. During the Suen He period, there were many famous painters and beautiful people in the world. In order for Su Danking to write and paint a portrait, countless women offered themselves pillow seats. However, Su Danking was aloof and had a high vision. So far, he had only painted 8 beauties. The last one was a young lady from the Tang family in Yuzhu. After finishing the painting, he felt that it would be difficult to paint women in this world, so he closed the painting and disappeared. This can be regarded as an elegant anecdote from the Jianghu world. It is unknown whether it is true or not, but the 8 beauties in the painting are indeed of natural beauty. Lu Yunlin has only seen the current queen mother and the late queen. Of course, with his status, he can only take a look at them from a distance, and he does not dare to get closer and take a closer look. Most of those I have never seen married princes from aristocratic families, such as the princess of King Su. Perhaps it is because beauties have had a bad life since ancient times. The 8 beauties who have become monks or died of illness have long been a thing of the past, and few people mention them anymore. The portrait hanging under the peach tree should be one of the 8 beauties known as the Suen He Bagui, but Lu Yunlin's eyesight could not tell which one it was. Song Yu, king of Yan, is obviously copying Su Danking's paintings, but the word saint in Danking holy hand is not small. Just like a martial arts master who teaches step by step for a lifetime, the apprentice may not be able to catch up with the master. Song Yu's painting after all these years, I still can't imitate its charm. Lu Yunlin waited in the peach blossom forest for a while, until the stack of rice paper on the table was used up. Song Yu shook his head and sighed, put the brush on the pen holder, turned and walked to the tea house on the left side of the house. It was freezing cold, and there was only a bamboo chair, a piano, and a chessboard in the tea house. Song Yu seemed to have long been accustomed to the ascetic life. He sat down on the bamboo chair, brewed tea, and said in a warm voice, "Yunlin, come and sit." After Lu Yunlin bowed respectfully outside the tea house, he slowly walked to sit opposite Song Yu and thought for a moment. "Your Majesty, the matter you asked me to pay attention to has come to fruition today." Song Yu brewed tea slowly, with an elegant and easygoing look on his handsome brows, and just nodded lightly. Lu Yunlin thought for a moment. At noon today, a gangster was confusing people outside the investigation bureau. I went to chase him but failed to catch him. After returning to the case file library, I found that someone took the opportunity to sneak into the Jiazi library and read the files of the 4 heroes, the King of Su, and the World's Strange Poison. In my opinion, it must be the King of Su's people who are investigating the news of the Dragon Lokgu. The case file library is located deep in the investigation bureau and it is impossible to enter from the outside. There must be a traitor in the government office. Song Yu gently raised his hand to stop Lu Yunlin's words and put the teacup in front of him. "Who is the traitor?" Did you find anything? Lu Yunlin took the teacup respectfully and smiled awkwardly. There is no news about the dragon locking goo in the case library. What can be found? Well, in order not to alarm others, I erased the traces, but I didn't find out who the traitor is, but he must still be working in the government office now. Song Yu nodded lightly, thought for a while, and smiled indifferently. Most people who are infected with the dragon locking goo will not survive for more than 3 years. I'm afraid that I'm worried. Let's find out who the hidden player is and help him. Lu Yunlin was a little puzzled holding the teacup. After hesitating for a moment, he still didn't ask more questions. He stood up and respectfully left the bamboo house. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 54. The sky gradually darkened, and the streets and alleys of Daifang were full of red lanterns. Women carried their children in their hands and walked through the bustling streets full of merchants and tourists. Many naughty children ran around holding fireworks in their hands, and there were also officials and ladies walking with smiling dolls. In the bluestone alleys where there is never a shortage of drinkers, Zhu Manzi walked back and forth with her waist knife, and sighed from time to time. In order to sneak into the case library to get information, Zhu Manzi first worked as a constable to catch thieves, and then went to the capital to become a wolf guard with great difficulty. Then, she took off and joined the Tianzi camp with the help of Su Shize. She finally got into the place where her father's information might be stored, but she didn't find anything. That's fine. Su Shize was infected with the dragon locking goo, which is a matter of life and death. She still didn't find anything, which is equivalent to accomplishing nothing and wasting the opportunity created by Su Shize. After today, if I continue to lure the tiger away from the mountain, I will definitely be alerted by the detective department. I may not have such a good opportunity to sneak in again. How should I explain to Master Su later? Just thinking about it makes my head hurt. Zhu Manzi had a lot of little plans in her mind, but she didn't dare to tell these things to outsiders. She could only walk back and forth in the light snow at night, occasionally looking down at the snow foam accumulated on her lapels. She was bored and deliberately straightened her body, looking like she wanted to catch snowflakes for fun. The sky was completely dark. I agreed to meet Master Su here, but Master Su didn't come. Zhu Manzi was afraid of missing him, so she walked in the alley again and again. I don't know how many times I have gone back and forth. Suddenly, at the entrance of the alley near the Sun family's shop, I saw a figure flash by. In a glimpse, Zhu Manzi found that it was a man wearing a bamboo hat and carrying a sword. This kind of dress is everywhere in the market. It is not surprising, but the man's steps are not stable, staggering and seems to be injured. Zhu Manzi had been a constable for a year, so he was naturally alert to this obviously abnormal situation. After thinking about it for a while, he quickly chased after him with his goose feather knife, and peeked at the corner of the alley. In the dimly lit alley, the man in the bamboo hat walked slowly with his right hand supporting the wall, and his left hand was hanging down weakly, obviously injured. He looked tall, with long legs, thin waist, and round buttocks. Zhu Manzi curled her lips slightly, and after noticing that the other party was a woman, she was obviously a little more cautious. An assassin appeared in Longjian Pavilion and stole the famous sword Shang Chun, and tried to assassinate Zhang Xiang. Tianziying has been searching for this assassin. According to the records of eyewitnesses in the Yamen, his height and figure are similar to the woman in front. Could it be? Zhu Manzi's eyes lit up. This is a great achievement. At least a few hundred taels of silver will be rewarded. Besides, Su Shize was also kidnapped by this thief last time, so there must be a grudge. Su Shize is so powerful. Zhu Manzi was worried that she couldn't report to Su Shize. Now she helped him catch a thief to relieve his hatred. He probably wouldn't forgive her for not doing a good job. Thinking of this, Zhu Manzi quietly walked into the alley, hanging behind the female thief from a distance. After a long time, she finally came to a sparsely populated alley. Squeak. The female thief opened a courtyard door, closed it after entering, and the sound of the bolt was heard. Zhu Manzi blinked, memorized the location, and then left the alley carefully. When the lights came on, Su Buling walked out of Madame Lu's courtyard, only to feel that his body was hollowed out. Since he got on the carriage and lay down at noon, Su Buling basically didn't get up. Several female doctors rubbed him, but he didn't know what they were rubbing. If it weren't for the pure eyes of several female doctors, he would have thought he was being taken advantage of. Not to mention Madame Lu, if he dared to move, she would just give him a look and he would not be able to leave even if he returned to Chang'an City. She found a few servants to carry him directly to the other courtyard, and fed him when he ate and drank water. The scene was like he was about to meet the king of hell. He was sweating and wanted to take a shower. If he hadn't been determined, Madame Lu would have helped him. However, no matter how many troops were mobilized, it was out of concern. Although Su Buling was a little overwhelmed, he was still warm in his heart after all. After leaving the other courtyard, Yunu led the horse over and bowed respectfully. "Little prince, Madame doesn't have a close friend around her. If you have free time, you should come and accompany her more." Yunu was Madame Lu's personal maid. According to the rules of the aristocratic family, they were both playmates and master and servant, and their relationship was sometimes closer than that of father and daughter. Yunu said these words naturally for Madame Lu, and she didn't want Su Buling to hide and be unable to find anyone. Su Buling nodded and chuckled. "I know." He raised his hand to take the reins, then jumped on the horse and galloped towards the outside of Jinghua Yuan. Kuishao Street is not far from Daifang. Chasing the wind and snow, he crossed the long street and soon arrived outside Qingxi Lane. Su Buling led the horse to Sun's shop. Sun Zhangyi returned to his usual appearance and chatted and laughed with the drinkers. After seeing Su Buling, he raised his hand to take the wine gourd. "Young master is here. The girl came just now, and it seemed that she wanted to see you. I asked her to go back first, and I will tell you when you come." "Really?" Su Buling raised his eyebrows, not surprised at all. He raised his hand to take the wine gourd and led the horse to the depths of the alley. But just after walking a short distance, he heard the sound of footsteps running towards him. Su Buling turned his head and saw Zhu Manzi trotting over with a goose feather knife in hand. The trembling movement was very powerful. He was a little worried that the wolf guards' uniforms would not hold up. Master Su, guess what I found?" "Ha ha." Zhu Manzi ran up to him breathlessly, her face flushed, and stopped in front of the horse, with her hands on her waist and a look of offering a treasure. Su Buling was a little amused, and continued to walk with the horse. "Have you found the dragon locking goo, or did you find news about your father?" "Neither." "Ha ha, oh no." Zhu Manzi was too nervous and afraid that the big fish would run away, so she spoke a little incoherently. She realized that her smile was wrong and quickly covered her mouth. Unfortunately, it was too late. Su Buling's eyes sank slightly, and he gently supported the hilt of the sword, and then used the scabbard to hit Zhu Manzi's buttocks, making a light pop sound. "You're so happy that I didn't find you. Are you kidding me?" "No." Zhu Manzi knew that he had said the wrong thing, but he didn't dare to get angry. He quietly rubbed his back and snatched the reins from Su Buling. "Just now I met a gangster in the alley. He's very valuable. No, he's made great contributions." Su Buling tilted his head and looked at him. "You're already a wolf guard in the Tianziying, and you're still accumulating merits. Do you want to be the commander of the investigation department?" Zhu Manzi did become a wolf guard in order to enter the case library, but he couldn't refuse the reward silver he picked up for free, so he pouted. "Well, when you are in a position, you should do your job. It seems that there is such a saying." Su Buling nodded, but he couldn't refute it, so he asked. What did you see in the case library today? Talk while walking, the thief will run away later. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 55. Time is too tight today, so I went to look for my father's whereabouts first, but I found nothing. I thought my father was a master, but now it seems that he is just like me, a small fish in the world. He he. The alley was quiet, and Zhu Manzi walked on the stone road, leading a horse taller than her, and recalled what she saw in the case library seriously. There are too many files in the cabinet recording Prince Su, and I only read the files about the ambush in Weha River. It says, in the early winter of the 9th year of Zhaohong, the Prince Su Buling went to Beijing to study, and was ambushed in Chenkang. The magistrates of the surrounding counties were unable to rescue him, and when they rushed to rescue him, the prince had disappeared. There were 207 bodies left on the riverside, most of them were servants of the palace. It is estimated that there are more than 100 thieves, who are strong and capable, and do not seem to be ordinary martial arts warriors. Su Buling frowned slightly and thought for a moment. I killed many people that day, and I had a high fever and did not remember much. Later, the guards were worried that the thieves would chase Ziliang, so they carried me to Chang'an directly. The records are correct. Is there any news about the dragon locking Gu later? Zhu Manzi shook her head. It was written later that you appeared outside Chang'an city, and you were infected with the dragon locking Gu, and you are still on patrol. Then I went to the Tianxia Kiju to look for it, but I couldn't find it after searching for a long time. It's not that I didn't pay attention, I really couldn't find it. Su Buling stroked his fingers and nodded slightly, but his face was slightly gloomy. According to Su Buling's analysis, there is a high chance that the court is behind the action, but it is not good to speculate without evidence. This time, if he sneaked into the case library and found clues, it would prove that the court was behind the action. He was targeted by the court, and he might not be able to leave Chang'an city in this life. It was good news that no clues were found, but the dragon locking Gu once again cut off the clues. It was true that Su Buling was very strong, but it was hard to say how long he could live. He was under great pressure to die at any time. But there was no point in being anxious about this matter. Su Buling could only keep a secret of it and let Lao Xiao continue to search for clues when he returned. Zhu Manzi saw that Su Buling was a little depressed, thought about it, and advised, Mr. Su, don't worry. Maybe the court didn't put the news of the dragon locking Gu in the case library, but it might be somewhere else, such as the palace. Su Buling paused, blinked his eyes and looked at the towering imperial city in the distance, and his mood became even more depressed. The case library was where the court stored various secrets. If even the case library could not be found, then the only place left was under the pillow of the current emperor. He couldn't sneak into the emperor's bedroom to rummage through the boxes and cabinets. The masters of the palace were not decorations. Alas! Su Buling shook his head and smiled casually. Forget it, take your time, let's stop here, you can just help me keep an eye on it in the future. Zhu Manzi secretly breathed a sigh of relief when she saw that Su Buling had no intention of blaming her, and nodded happily. The two of them wandered around in the alley behind the bustling long street, and after walking for about half a quarter of an hour, they gradually came to the alley where Neng Qingyi was hiding. Zhu Manzi raised his hand seriously to block Su Buling's way, first made a gesture of silence, then gestured twice with the military gesture, pointed to the courtyard in the distance, and signaled you to go up and cover me first. Su Buling raised his eyebrows, and had already guessed who Zhu Manzi had discovered from the route. He was not surprised at all at this time. He slowly walked to the gate of the courtyard with a sword in hand, raised his hand and knocked. Dong dong. Zhu Manzi was anxious. How could you catch a thief like this? She raised her hand and pulled Su Buling's sleeve, blinked her eyes, pouted, and reminded Su Buling not to delay. Su Buling ignored her, stood in front of the courtyard gate with both hands on the hilt of the sword, and waited patiently. In the dilapidated courtyard, the faint smell of medicine drifted in the air. Ning Qingyi sat under the eaves, with a small charcoal stove in front of him, and a medicine pot on it. The flames jumped out from the bottom of the pot and swayed, and the weak firelight chilled her slightly pale cheeks. The old courtyard has been cleaned up, the fallen leaves on the ground have been swept clean, and even the vines on the wall have been removed. The only untidy place is probably the window that Su Buling repaired by himself. During the days when Ning Qingyi was recuperating in the small courtyard, he often wondered whether the owner of the courtyard would be angry when he came back and found that the window was nailed like this. If he tidied up the courtyard a little, it should make the owner of the courtyard feel more balanced. Gurgle gurgle. The medicine pot was steaming and making a slight sound. Ning Qingyi looked at her left arm wrapped in white cloth, with a bit of disappointment in her eyes. She had studied martial arts for 10 years at Changqing Temple, and thought that her martial arts skills were already top-notch in the world. However, after fighting with Zhang Xiang, she realized that the martial arts world was in deep water and fire. None of the masters who had been famous for a long time were good people. Their experience and reactions were too inhuman. They couldn't be killed even by sneak attacks. I'm afraid there will be no chance in the future. Thinking of the assassination scene in the daytime, Ning Qingyi's eyes were a bit puzzled. Now I owe that little prince a life again, and I really don't know how to repay it. But that man was not serious either. It was obviously a casual fight between them. How could he lean on her arms with Tai Shan Kao? Although this move was the most suitable for the situation at that time, it was a bit heavy. My chest is still numb now. Ning Qingyi raised his hand and rubbed it, secretly complaining, Lecher. With a little movement, the soreness all over my body made Ning Qingyi frown slightly. In fact, it's not that there is no chance today. If she was in her prime, she would have a chance to kill Zhang Xiang. It's a pity that I was injured in Longjian Pavilion last time, and my period has come these days. My qi and blood are not flowing smoothly and even my reactions are slow. The medicine I boiled is also used to regulate qi and blood. While thinking about random things, Ning Qingyi sat under the eaves for a long time. Before the medicine was ready, there was a knock on the door. Dong dong. Ning Qingyi was immediately alert, picked up the long sword beside him, stood up and walked lightly behind the porch, and said in a deep voice. Who? Eagle Finger Sanren. Ning Qingyi had never heard of this nickname, but he recognized the voice. He breathed a sigh of relief, put down the sword, and walked to the open gate. Zaya. The alley was dimly lit. When he looked up, he saw a handsome man in white standing outside the gate, holding a long sword in both hands, with a faint smile, and strolling in the alley casually. Ning Qingyi was born cold. He grew up in a dojo and had not experienced much worldly affairs. He held the gate and pursed his lips. Before he could think of a good word, he saw a girl's upper body sticking out from behind the man who was not allowed to speak. Wearing the clothes of a wolf guard, he was not tall, but his figure was well developed, and his big eyes were full of hostility. Ning Qingyi thought she was being sold, but after thinking carefully, there was no need to bring a little wolf guard whose hair had not even grown fully to deal with her, so he could only nod slightly. Mr. Su, who is this? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 56. Outside the courtyard gate in a deserted alley, Su Bulet and Ling Chujian waited quietly. Zhu Manzi was a little nervous. The other party was a gangster that even Tianzikamp had a headache for, and he was no ordinary fish in the world. After pulling Su Buling's sleeves and getting no response, Zhu Manzi had no choice but to hide behind Su Buling, waiting for a sword to seal his throat later, then ran to collect the corpse and pick up the equipment. After all, Shang Chun is a famous sword, so, it's valuable. Who? Eagle points to Sanren. A brief dialogue sounded, and the female thief's voice was light and clear, and she sounded very beautiful. Zhu Manzi frowned and pursed his lips, feeling a little worried. If this thief is a great beauty, will Mr. Su be merciful? No, no, how can Mr. Su, a cold and arrogant person like him, care about the appearance of his daughter's family? Squeak. While thinking, the courtyard door opened. The expected flash of swords and shadows did not appear, and the shield in front of him remained motionless in the wind and snow. Zhu Manzi looked a little confused, held the knife in his hand, and secretly glanced between Su Buling's arms. As a result, I saw a beautiful woman in white, holding the door frame with both hands, standing quietly behind the courtyard door. A few subtle smiles flashed through her cold spring-like eyes. There was no murderous look on her face, but she felt like she was seeing a good friend. Zhu Manzi's heart skipped a beat and he felt something was wrong. He hurriedly stuck his head out and glared at the female thief. Ning Qingyi looked at Zhu Manzi for a few times, then looked at Su Buling, and asked softly. Master Su, who is this? Zhu Manzi was a little anxious and hurriedly said, Bold thief, how dare you? Ouch! His butt was slapped by the scabbard again. Zhu Manzi quickly shut up, glanced at Su Buling secretly, pursed his lips, and finally he let out a soft hadash. Su Buling didn't care and walked into the courtyard door with a slight smile on his face. My guard, Miss Ning, don't panic, you are on your own. Zhu Manzi was immediately unhappy when she heard this. She saw that Su Buling knew the assassin, and maybe he was the person Su Buling invited. She had some guesses about the details, but it was definitely not easy to ask. But after all, she and Su Buling are still close friends. The matter of becoming a guard has not started yet, so how can she be regarded as a guard? Zhu Manzi blinked, looked at Ning Qingyi, and whispered. Master Su, do you know him? Su Buling nodded, I know you. Then he entered the yard. Ning Qingyi naturally did not stop him and turned around to get out of the way. Zhu Manzi wanted to follow him, but when he looked up, he saw the snow-white fox fur hanging under the eaves. She recognized that this was Su Buling's fox fur, which was very expensive in the market, and it was also an underwear, and it appeared in a woman's yard. Zhu Manzi's little eyebrows furrowed tightly. He looked at Ning Qingyi's figure and didn't know where he was thinking. He muttered Hu Miizi secretly, then turned around and left while holding the knife on his waist. Su Buling just entered the courtyard gate and noticed that Zhu Manzi had not come in. He turned his head and asked. Manzi, where are you going? I still have something to do, let's go first. Tap tap tap. The boots were a bit heavy as they stepped on the bluestone pavement, and the words were a bit rude. Su Buling frowned, but didn't take it seriously and closed the courtyard door. The night is getting darker. Ning Qingyi sat on the small bench and poured the concoction from the medicine jar into the small bowl with gentle movements. Under the eaves of the small courtyard, Su Buling stood in front of his snowy fox fur and looked up and down. Cleaning fur is a technical job and it can be ruined if you are not careful. He originally thought that Ning Qingyi washed it with water, but he never thought that Ning Qingyi was very careful and did not know how to remove the original stains. Ning Qingyi raised his eyes and looked at it, as if he noticed Su Buling's surprise, and said calmly, although I grew up in Changqing Temple, I have not become a monk. I practice martial arts in the mountains on weekdays, and I also hunt tigers and leopards and sell them to vendors. Su Buletinling suddenly realized, turned around and sat down opposite the small stove, and said with a chuckle, Miss Ning is really virtuous. Anyone who marries you as his wife will be blessed in the future. Ning Qingyi blinked her eyes. She didn't like talking politely to others, so she nodded and smiled slightly and changed the topic. Thank you for your help today, young master. It's a pity that I didn't kill Zhang Xiang. The reputation of slaughter of 10,000 people is well deserved. I'm afraid there aren't many people in the world who can pull off 3 moves from him. Su Buling nodded, that's right, even if I'm not poisoned, I can't kill him with 3 moves. The words sounded like bragging. Ning Qingyi wanted to say, don't talk nonsense, but she didn't know Su Buling's true skills, so she finally got down to business. Young master, if you go into the case record library, you can find a way to detoxify. Su Buling shook his head with a hint of helplessness. We found nothing, which can be considered good news. At least for now, it seems that it is not the hand of the imperial court. However, the clues to the locking dragon goo have been cut off. Ning Qingyi knew how powerful locking dragon goo was, and her expression became more serious as she frowned slightly. Then the young master won't live for a few days. Su Buling's face was filled with dark lines. After confirming that Ning Qingyi said this in a very serious tone, he blinked. Well, I should probably live for another year or 2. Ning Qingyi's eyes showed a bit of sadness, and she was silent for a moment. I don't know many people in the world, but there are still a few experts, but I can't guarantee that I can ask for clues about the dragon locking goo. As long as the girl has her heart. Su Buling nodded and chuckled, looking at Ning Qingyi for a few times. Seeing that she looked not very good, he went to the medicine pot and smelled it. Dangui, Beishao, Danshan, is the girl having her period? Ning Qingyi's face froze, and she almost threw the medicine bowl in her hand directly over. Even if she was a cold person, she was a little annoyed and ashamed. She picked up the sword beside her, and her eyes were slightly cold. Mr. Su, if you can't speak, don't speak. Su Buling was secretly happy to get his revenge, but his face was innocent. I just care about the girl, don't be so angry, I accidentally bumped into the girl's chest during the day. Shua. The long sword was unsheathed, and the cold light was pressing. Ning Qingyi's face flushed. She didn't expect Su Buling to talk about that pot. She raised the sword and pointed at Su Buling first, and then turned to the courtyard gate. You go. The voice trembled slightly, and the tone was very cold. Su Buling raised his hand, stood up angrily, and walked towards the gate under the gaze of those cold eyes, and did not forget to turn back and remind him. Remember to drink more hot water. Okay, I'm leaving. Ning Qingyi's sword-holding hand trembled slightly, and he didn't know how much restraint he had to use to avoid poking a few holes in this steely straight man. When Su Buling's figure disappeared at the gate, Ning Qingyi put down the long sword in his hand, stared at the gate for a long time, and after making sure that Su Buling did not run back again, he muttered in a low voice. Lecher, what's the use of drinking hot water, little prince? Ning Qingyi sat back in front of the small stove, picked up the medicine bowl and blew it gently, and was silent for a moment, and then looked at the gate again, with a bit of strange meaning between his eyebrows. Maybe he thought the young prince was too straightforward, and couldn't even lie to girls, so he had a pretty face for nothing. After Su Buling walked out of the courtyard, he looked around, and he didn't know where Zhu Manzi had gone. There was only a big horse wandering around in the alley. Su Buling circled around the alley and waited at the entrance for a while. When he didn't find anyone, he got on the horse and returned to the palace on Kuishao Street. It was late at night, and the lights in the palace were dim. 2 of the 8 guards followed Ning Qingyi and Zhu Manzi, and the remaining 6 were conscientiously patrolling around the palace. Old Xiao stood between the 2 stone lions with his cane, looking forward like a door god. When he saw Su Buling coming back, he hurried forward and said with a chuckle. Little prince, how is it? Su Buling stopped outside the mansion, threw the whip to the guard, and shook his head. Zhu Manzi went into the case library and didn't find any clues about the dragon locking goo. I'm afraid it was spread by the wandering sorcerer. When old Xiao heard this, he couldn't help but sigh, that's troublesome. There's not even a case library? Old Xiao, I really can't think of where else the news of the dragon locking goo can be hidden. Su Buling picked up the wine pot and took a sip. Check it slowly. I'm healthy, as long as you don't force yourself to move, you can live for 2 or 3 years. There is always a way out. Old Xiao stroked his cane and pondered for a while. The dragon locking goo comes from South Vietnam. The prince has sent people to South Vietnam to look for it, but there are deep mountains and old forests there, and there is no news so far. Don't say these useless things. It's not the first time you have returned disappointed. Alas. Old Xiao nodded and said no more. The data seems to be a bit disappointing. If you think it's okay, you can recommend it to book friends. Thank you. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 57. It was late at night, and the long alley was dark. Zhu Manzi held the knife on her waist and walked out of the alley angrily. She looked back and found that Su Buling had no intention of following her. Instead, the wind-chasing horse followed her with small steps, and snorted 2 white mist-like breaths in the cold wind. It obviously felt that it was not in line with its noble status to have no one to lead it. Zhu Manzi took 2 steps, tilted her head to look, and then crossed her waist and widened her eyes. Why are you following me? I'm not a servant who leads horses. The wind-chasing horse shook its big head, as if it understood what the little guy in front of it said. It snorted and showed some dissatisfaction, turned around and ran back. Hey! Zhu Manzi pursed her lips, and she was even more angry. It doesn't matter if Su Shiza treats her as a guard. After all, her status is there. It's really bullying for even a horse to treat her as a guard. Zhu Manzi lingered at the alley entrance for a while. She wanted to wait for Su Buling to come out, but then she would not really be a guard. After thinking about it, she felt that as a man of the world, she should have some backbone, so she snorted and turned away. After walking a few steps, she saw a small stone blocking the road, so she kicked it with the tip of her shoe, but she didn't expect that the stone rolled around and still blocked the middle of the road. Zhu Manzi's face sank. There is a group of houses near the detective department 2 miles away. Most of the wolf guards are selected from all over the world, and there are many who are stationed in Chang'an. The houses here are basically inhabited by the families of the wolf guards. Zhu Manzi had just arrived and rented a small courtyard here. Few wolf guards brought their families with them when they went out on duty, and most of them sat at tea stalls on the street to listen to storytellers talk about their great achievements at night. Lu Hoer was picking peanuts at a tea stand on the street. When he saw Zhu Manzi walking over in a sullen manner, he stood up and greeted her. Manzi, why are you unhappy again? Zhu Manzi kicked the pebbles on the street and said without raising her head. I can't solve the case, it's annoying. Lu Hoer sighed, walked up to her and whispered, the theft of the imperial horse was last year's case. It was not solved at that time. It is as difficult as climbing to the sky to solve it now. Don't take it so seriously. Zhu Manzi didn't want to listen to this. She said and walked away. Lu Hoer thought for a while and said, I don't know how many times the records in the case library have been turned over. To investigate the case, you should go to the place where the crime happened. If you have time, your brothers will accompany you there. I know, I know. Zhu Manzi took a few steps and felt a little hungry. She ran over and took away a basket of peanuts on Lu Hoer's table. Lu Hoer spread his hands and showed some helplessness. It's on your account. Give me back the silver and I'll pay. We are friends, it hurts our relationship to mention silver. Under the same sky, fine and dense snowflakes sprinkled on the mountains and rivers, and a few lights were on in the quarry on the outskirts of Chang'an. On a cold winter night, most of the corvées who were reformed here for committing crimes could only sleep in shacks, and they could make do with tattered cotton cloth and some dry straw. In the dead of night, a few bowls of porridge were obviously not enough to support the day's work. The corvées who were exhausted after a day of work would sometimes stand up and sniff in the cold air. The aroma of wine and meat drifted from afar. Even if they couldn't eat it, it was good to smell it. In the house where the quarry manager lived, bursts of laughter were faint in the night wind. The soldiers stood under the house with long spears, and sometimes looked up, but unfortunately they couldn't see anything. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of horse hooves came from afar. 3 horses galloped in the night and came near the house. They ignored the guards and rode directly outside the house. The leader of the 3 was a master of the Li family. The 2 behind him were wearing bamboo hats and leather coats. The swords and guns behind them were wrapped in black cloth. They were dressed like standard people in the martial arts world. The 3 people dismounted outside the newly renovated house. The master walked to the door respectfully and knocked. "Second young master, the people are here." The piano music and laughter in the house stopped. After a while, 2 women dressed in fancy clothes came out with silver bills with disappointed faces, and their eyes swept over the bodies of the 2 martial artists. "Come in." "Yes." The master bowed slightly and raised his hand. "2, please come in." The 2 martial artists looked at each other and entered the small house one after another. Compared to the cold wind outside, the room was much warmer. All kinds of luxurious furnishings filled the room, and the air was filled with a bit of unpleasant smell. Li Tianlu put on his clothes, took a wine jar and sat on the couch next to the stove. He sat casually and looked around with a rebellious look. "Sit down." The 2 Jianghu guests didn't mind the attitude of this nobleman, and chose a place in the room to sit down. The master glanced outside for a few times before closing the door. He walked to Li Tianlu and bowed. "Second young master, I have been paying attention to Zhu Manzi's movements these days. I just got the news that Zhu Manzi has taken over an old case of stealing imperial horses in the investigation department. He will definitely investigate in the next few days. But the master asked you to be patient." Li Tianlu raised his hand and snorted lightly. "If you don't take revenge, you are not a gentleman. I can't deal with Xiaoteng. What can a small constable do to me? At most, I will stay in this quarry for another half a month. Tie her up and make her clean." The master smiled and looked at the 2 silent men. "These 2 are rangers from other places, Ji Huan and Wu Biao. They just arrived in Chang'an and have a clean foundation." Li Tianlu looked up and said, "How is your skill?" Ji Huan, the leader of the 2 Jianghu Knights, raised his hands and clasped his fists. "We want to open a martial arts school in Chang'an City, so we come to pay homage to you. You can rest assured that we are good at martial arts." Li Tianlu swung the wine pot and laughed softly. "If you want to open a martial arts school in Chang'an, you have to beat half of the masters in Hutai Street. Just you 2. Ji Huan raised his head slightly, revealing his beard. "I am enough." Wu Biao, who was standing next to him, carried 2 unjoined iron spears on his back and raised his hands and said, "Although we brothers are young, we have traveled thousands of miles. The 2 of us have never suffered a loss. The Wang family of Taiyuan once invited us to be retainers, but we 2 brothers wanted to make a name for ourselves, so we came to Chang'an. No one who can be a retainer of aristocratic families is a mediocre person." Li Tianlu nodded slightly. "Although my Li family is not the Longzi Li family, its weight in the court is no less than that of the Wang and Li families. In the future, we may be on par with several other families. As long as you get things done, you can work under me in the future. I am very familiar with the martial arts hall in Hutai Street, just say hello." "Thank you, master." Ji Huan and Wu Biao raised their hands and clasped their fists. Without saying anything more, they stood up and left the house. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gongzi. Chapter 58. In the next 2 days, Su Buling did not bother about the dragon chain Gu anymore. He went back to his life of attending classes at the Imperial College during the day and staying indoors at night. When he was in the Imperial College, Su Buling usually stayed in the bell and drum tower to ring the bell. After the morning reading, Song Yufu would come to the bell and drum tower without fail and say something like a gentleman should not use his mouth but his hands. And think twice before you act. It was strange. Su Buling was a little troubled because he did not find any clues about the dragon chain gu. He did not want to bully this junior who had no idea what was in her head. He caught her to copy books when he was annoyed by the noise. I don't know if she was used to copying. Song Yufu not only did not resist, but also worked very hard, copying a few more sheets of paper every time, and after finishing, she would say, "You and I are friends, don't be polite, just remember the favor." Su Buling did not mean to be polite with her, and asked Song Yufu if she wanted to be a princess. As a result, the silly girl shook her head firmly, looking like a gentleman's friendship. Su Buling really didn't understand what Song Yufu wanted to do, so he put it aside. Anyway, this girl was interesting to talk to, and she wouldn't cause him any trouble, at least Su Buling thought so. On the third day of the 12th lunar month, the long-lost sun shone in the garden of the palace. After being repaired by several palace guards, it was much neater inside and out, and red lanterns were hung under the eaves. It finally looked like the new year. Su Buling rode back from the Imperial College. As soon as he arrived at the door, he saw two groups of people standing outside the palace waiting respectfully. One was a palace maid, and the other was Mrs. Lu's maid Yunu. The sedan chair was parked next to the stone lion. Su Buling turned over and got off the horse, and the palace maid took a step ahead and bowed slightly. "Your Highness, the Queen Mother has set up a banquet in the palace. Please come in and have a chat." Su Buling was prepared for this. "I'll change my clothes and go over later." The palace maid nodded and smiled, then retreated respectfully. Yunu came over at this time and said with a smile, "Madam came at noon. I wanted to go to the Imperial College to call the young prince back, but Madam said no." Su Buling nodded, handed the horse to the guard, and entered the palace. Old Xiao went to the place where all kinds of people gathered to get information. He was not at the mansion, and the backyard was empty. He walked quickly to the study, took a look and saw no one, and then came to the bedroom. Su Buling walked past the bedroom window and looked up to see Madame Lu lying on the table in a dark blue pleated skirt. Madame Lu must have fallen asleep. Her eyebrows were slightly frowned, and her black hair was all over her cheeks. Her breathing was steady, and it could be seen that the collar hanging under the edge of the table had a very tense arc, with handsome peaks and ridges. Looking from the side, well, it was more spectacular than Zhu Manzi. Ahem dash. Su Buling touched his nose and quickly moved his unintentional gaze elsewhere. As usual, Mrs. Lu came with a food box and placed it on the table. There was also a tray next to it with a robe inside. The room was very quiet. Because there were few furnishings, it seemed a bit empty and cold. The underground of the palace was equipped with a ground dragon like the Imperial Palace. The heat from burning fire in the outer house went directly to the back house through the fire channel. Even if the bride was naked in the winter, she would not feel cold. However, the palace was too large. The firewood used by the ground dragon for a winter was enough for the people on the street to survive the winter. Su Buling lived alone and did not stay in the palace often. Once the ground dragon was burning, it could not be stopped, so there was no such waste. The room was still relatively cold. Su Buling entered the bedroom, walked to the small table and leaned over to take a look. The faint fragrance was fragrant. The fragrance of peony flowers was refreshing, not too strong or too light, just right. I think it was the top fragrance powder of Xian Zizai. Su Buling was not a woman, so naturally she could not smell what type was used, but it smelled good anyway. Seeing that Madame Lu was breathing steadily and sleeping peacefully, he walked to the closet quietly, took out a soft blanket, and draped it over Madame Lu's back. A faint humming sounded. Madame Lu's lips moved slightly, and she raised her hand to tighten the soft blanket on her shoulders. Her frowning eyebrows also relaxed. It was obvious that she was still quite cold just now and did not sleep well. Su Buling stood by and waited for a while. Madame Lu did not mean to wake up. He would go to the palace later, and it would be late at night when he came back. She would definitely catch a cold if she slept on the table. Thinking of this, Su Buling hesitated, leaned over and raised his hand through the knees of Madame Lu under her skirt, wanting to carry Madame Lu to the bed to rest. The skirt slid over the back of her hand. The fabric was very good and delicate, and the flesh grew where it should grow, and it was still a bit heavy. Su Buling tried to be careful, but it was a pity that Madame Lu was awakened as soon as he exerted force on his arm. Madame Lu suddenly raised her face, the hairpins between her hair trembled slightly, her eyes were a little confused, and she tilted her head to look at Su Buling, who was close at hand. Su Buling blinked his eyes, a little helpless. I. Madame Lu's eyes quickly cleared up, and after reacting, she did not yell like last time, but raised her hand and hit Su Buling's hand. Snap! Her eyes were serious, and there was a little annoyance. "I am your aunt," was about to come out. Su Buling retracted his hand and spread it out again. "Aunt Lu, don't misunderstand, I saw you fell asleep, so I sent you to rest." Madame Lu looked around, and after remembering the purpose of coming here at noon, her face returned to normal. She raised her hand to hook the hair by her ear, and slightly adjusted her wrinkled dress, then whispered. "Buling, when did you come back? I was a little sleepy just now, and fell asleep." Su Buling sat down next to the small table, raised his hand to open the lunch box. "I just came back, Aunt Lu came to wait for me. Is there anything? I can't come if I'm fine." Su Buletinling's hand that took the longan froze, and he chuckled. "That's not what I meant. I heard you knew said you would come over at noon." Mrs. Lu took the food box over, took out the longan from it, gently opened it with her delicate hands, and said softly. "I'm bored at home, so I stopped by to take a look. The new year is coming soon, so I took the time to make a new robe. You can try it on." Su Buling's clothes were basically handmade by Mrs. Lu. Hearing this, he naturally showed a bit of surprise. He raised his hand to pick up the robe in the tray, unfolded it and took a few glances, and his handsome smile froze. The brand new robe is made of shui yun brocade from Jiangnan. The style is the common gold-trimmed prince's robe. The texture is exquisite, but the color is earthy yellow and looks a bit earthy. I guess no prince or noble son would be willing to wear this when going out, Hexiang County, like a rich man. Mrs. Lu was tepid, lowering her head and twirling her dragon eyes. "What? Doesn't it look good?" "It looks good. What Aunt Lu gave me, how could it not look good?" Su Buling nodded with admiration, stood up and walked behind the screen, took off his snow-colored brocade robe and put on this unique young master's robe. Rustling. After a while, Su Buling walked out from behind the screen and looked at the bronze mirror a few times. He has been very talented in martial arts since childhood, and his figure is definitely not much different. With a face like an immortal, wearing this clothes, he looks like a handsome rich man. Su Buling didn't care much about appearance, and tidied up his clothes calmly. Mrs. Lu sat at the table and took a few glances. She had always dressed Su Buling in an extremely elegant manner, but suddenly she was a little uncomfortable wearing such an outfit. After struggling for a moment, she raised her hand and said, "That's all, I didn't choose the material well. Take it off and I'll go back and make another one. It's good, no need to bother. Take off." Mrs. Lu patted the table with her small hand. Ruxing's eyes widened slightly. Su Buling had nothing to say. He honestly took out a white robe from the closet, put it on again behind the screen, and walked around in front of Mrs. Lu. After Mrs. Lu looked at it carefully, she stood up, straightened Su Buling's clothes, and said softly, Etiquette begins with proper dress. Men should pay attention to their appearance when going out. Su Buling took a breath and looked down at Mrs. Lu with a dignified and serious expression. He wanted to reply, "This rustic robe is a gift from you." "I pay great attention to appearance, however." Mrs. Lu must be aggrieved by saying this. He could only say with a smile, "I know." Mrs. Lu was then satisfied and nodded. "Go, don't stay in the palace for too long, be careful that the walls have ears." Su Buling hesitated slightly, walked a few steps towards the door, then turned back and said, "Is there anything else?" "No, go and come back quickly." Su Buling nodded, and after making sure that Mrs. Lu would not be angry if he left the palace with doubts and went to meet the Queen Mother at night. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 59. Dong Dong. The sky is like a curtain, the sea of lights is like a tide, and 108 dusk drums are ringing through Chang'an. Among the palaces and corridors of the majestic imperial city, the palace maids and eunuchs are walking in an orderly manner, peaceful and solemn, and there is no singing songs and dancing swallows as imagined by the common people. Wine pools and meat forests, even the sound of harp and harp is rare in each palace. When the Emperor Songji inherited the throne, he devoted himself entirely to the affairs of the court. The lights in the royal study were kept on until late at night. Sometimes even the little eunuch accompanying him couldn't stand it and had to change shifts to keep watch. It is naturally a good thing for the king to attach great importance to the country, but it makes the concubines in the harem miserable. They cannot see the emperor several times throughout the year. As for the struggle for favor in the palace, no one is favored at all. When the queen was around, Songji would still go to the harem. After the queen died of illness a few years ago, Songji rarely went to sleep in the palace of his concubines. Even many concubines are suffering from the misery of no one can see their flowers falling every year, not to mention the queen mother who stays alone in Changal Palace. After the death of the late emperor, according to the concubine system left over from the founding of the country, palace servants with lower status were given silver taels to find their husbands' families, and concubines with higher status were sent to the imperial mausoleum for 3 years, after which they could remarry. However, the queen is not included in this list. Unless Guozhou changes, it is impossible for the queen to marry a second man. As for the queen mother, it is estimated that no one dares to marry or become the emperor's stepfather. After all, no one wants to see the emperor's mother being bullied during the day and at night. The queen mother had no heirs, so she could not be taken to live in peace and happiness like the concubines who gave birth to the prince. She could only live alone in Changal Palace for 10 years. Although Songji often came to greet her and call her mother, they were not related by blood and it was just a formality. The queen mother did not have the power and qualifications to be involved in politics, and her future path could basically be seen at a glance. She was probably buried in the imperial mausoleum together in her 40s or 50s, and was recorded in the history books. It was getting dark, the palace lanterns were lit on the corners of the eaves, and a few palace maids walked through Changal Palace, bringing plates of exquisite meals to the living room. There was a heater in the room, and the queen mother, who was dressed in gorgeous palace clothes, was lying on her side on the couch, with her left hand supporting her cheek, playing chess with the palace maids, her skirt hanging on the couch, like a peacock spreading its tail, revealing a pair of small palace boots and delicate ankles. Maybe I felt sleepy after waiting for a long time, and occasionally I would cover my lips and yawn. It's not that the queen mother is lethargic, but that she stays in Changal Palace to take care of her old age and has nothing to do. She usually goes to bed after dark, which has become a habit over the years. After calculating the time, the queen mother glanced outside the palace. "Qiao Yi, why hasn't Su Buling come here yet?" Chiao Yi knelt down next to the soft couch. After placing the pieces on the chessboard, she said softly, "Actually, the Queen Mother should not have asked Prince Su to enter the palace." The Queen Mother raised her eyes and looked at Chiao Yi, slightly confused. Chiao Yi is the Queen Mother's personal maid. She grew up in Huainan. She was taught since she was a child to help her young ladies compete for favor among princes and the palace's back houses and make suggestions. Needless to say, she has the ability to analyze situations. Chiao Yi pondered for a while before speaking. There is a widespread rumor that there is a vassal king plotting to unify. As for which vassal king it is not stated clearly, but King Su has the most military power, so it is self-evident who he refers to. And there are people in the court. Some people say that the Holy One wants to cut down the feudal vassal. Although the Holy One has never expressed this intention, the rumors will not spread by themselves. The Queen Mother said lazily and signaled Chiao Yi to continue. Chiao Yi thought about it carefully. These two rumors are trying to sow the relationship between the Holy Lord and the vassal king. I can't tell what mate is hiding behind it, but it must not be a trivial matter. My Xiao family spans 3 dynasties and has been for generations. Prime Minister, your position is very special. The Queen Mother is not allowed to be close to you. If the courtiers suspect that my Xiao family is deliberately trying to win over Prince Su. Chiao Yi was obviously reminding the Queen Mother not to fall in line casually, as it would be troublesome if she stood in the wrong line. But the Queen Mother had long since given up her thoughts of getting involved in the court. She sighed quietly and threw the chess pieces into the chess basket. My second brother and third sister are in charge of the Xiao family. I married into the palace 10 years ago and it was the Song family. It's just common sense to ask Su Buling to come over for dinner. Let them guess. Chiao Yi hesitated for a moment. Also, my Xiao family is very involved. Prince Su was ambushed in Weha and was also infected by the extinct dragon Lok Gu. The power behind it must be quite big. The Queen Mother looked slightly condensed, raised her upper body with her elbows on the soft couch, frowned and thought for a moment. Are you saying that the poison was administered by my Xiao family? Chiao Yi staggered, raised her hand and waved it anxiously, and said anxiously, Queen Mother, don't say this, it will be troublesome if others hear it. I, the Xiao family, are not pawns. I never make plans before taking action. How could I do this? This is a matter of fact. The Queen Mother blinked her eyes and lay down on the soft couch again, looking a little helpless. That's okay, I have my own sense of proportion. During the chat, footsteps sounded outside the palace. The palace maid walked outside the palace and whispered. Queen Mother, Prince Su has arrived. The Queen Mother gathered some energy and stood up to go out to greet him. She stopped halfway and picked up the bronze mirror from the soft couch to take a look at it. Chiao Yi hurriedly walked over, tidied up the messy bun, smoothed the palace skirt, and then followed the Queen Mother out of the door. The words were divided into 2 parts. In the afternoon, merchants and pawns were coming and going in the back streets of Daifang, and Golan, the gambling shop, was just about to open its doors. Zhu Manzi wandered around the streets alone, occasionally running to the vicinity of Qingxi Lane to take a look. Unfortunately, Prince Su never came back in the past 2 days. As a girl of only 16, she was not very shrewd to begin with, so Zhu Manzi naturally overthought, thinking that maybe she had left without saying goodbye the day before yesterday, which had angered Master Su. She was just a little detective born in the market, not even a Jianghu person, and her status was very different from that of the prince of a vassal state. She should be careful when she met and talked to him, so how could she be so petty with Master Su? But Master Su was not such a stingy person. Why would he not come to see her because of such a small matter? Zhu Manzi's big round eyes were obviously a little disappointed. After walking around the street twice, she walked to a roof at the corner, squatted on the steps, broke off a small branch and drew circles on the ground. Although she was young and cheerful, Zhu Manzi was not stupid. After waiting for 2 days without Su Buling coming, she became more and more depressed. Recalling the details of these days, first drawing the sword to help in the back street, then being a hero in the alley to save the beauty, going to Beimajwang to kill people, entering the case library. Everything seems to be a coincidence, but there is obviously an invisible thread connecting them. Since the encounter in front of the restaurant, everything happened around the purpose of entering the case library. Su Shizi, could he be using me? Thinking of this, Zhu Manzi's heart trembled violently, and the small branch in his hand broke with a snap sound. No, no. Zhu Manzi shook his head and laughed, thinking that he was a little whimsical. How could Su Shizi, such a good person, use her? But as he laughed, he couldn't laugh anymore. She seemed useless. This thought came to his mind, and Zhu Manzi didn't know why her nose suddenly felt sour, and she pursed her lips tightly, and her slightly immature face looked at the end of the back street. After staring blankly for a long time, the shadows of people coming and going on the street appeared, but the handsome young man in white clothes still did not appear. Zhu Manzi bit his lower lip, hummed inaudibly, picked up the small branch on the ground, and continued to draw circles. Not long after drawing, the sound of horse hooves suddenly stopped in front of him. Zhu Manzi's whole body trembled slightly, and he raised his head suddenly. Unfortunately, the surprised look in his eyes soon dimmed again. Lu Hou and Wang Dazhuang led 3 horses, looking down at Zhu Manzi squatting under the eaves, a little puzzled. Manzi, why are you crying? No. Sand got in my eyes, what are you doing here? Lu Hou spread his hands, a little puzzled. Today I went to the post station outside the city to investigate a case. My brothers and I waited outside the government office for a long time for you to come. If you don't leave, you will be scolded by the commander. Zhu Manzi just remembered this, stood up and patted her clothes, then climbed on the horse with her head down, without saying a word, looked back at the end of the street again, and then shouted "Gee," galloping out of the city. Lu Hou and Wang Dazhuang couldn't figure out the little girl's mind, so they followed her and headed out of the city. Next to a tea stall in the back street, 2 vagrants wearing bamboo hats looked at each other, and when the horses were about to disappear, they threw a few copper coins on the table, and stood up and untied the reins on the hitching post. Next to another tea stall, a man who was drinking tea, when the 2 vagrants were about to disappear, threw a few copper coins on the table, and stood up and untied the reins on the hitching post. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 60. The cold wind blew and the palace lanterns swayed. It was just getting dark and the imperial city was closed at midnight, which was around 9 o'clock, so there was plenty of time. Su Buling entered the palace just for a formality, and had no intention of having a long conversation with the Queen Mother. He came out after a meal, and maybe went to Xianzhezi to buy some rouge and gouache. It's not that Su didn't ask him to use it. This afternoon he felt that something was wrong with Mrs. Lu. With Mrs. Lu's craftsmanship, it was impossible to make such an ugly robe for him to wear, and she had to take it out before he went to the palace to see the Queen Mother. Although I don't understand the reason, judging from Su Buling's experience, Mrs. Lu will definitely be resentful for several days afterwards, and it may be difficult to escape without some preparation. While thinking wildly, Su Buling dismounted his horse outside the imperial city. There was already a palace maid waiting outside the imperial city, with a chariot beside him. Su Buling handed over the horse to the palace gate guard, climbed on the steps and was carried by the eunuchs into the palace gate. The imperial city occupies 1/5 of Chang'an, and there are probably nearly 10,000 people living there including officials, maids, concubines, guards, etc. Naturally, it is impossible for the Queen Mother to live in the harem of Songji. Changal Palace is located on the east side of the imperial city. It is a separate palace complex, also known as the East Palace. Changal Palace occupies a large area, but because the Queen Mother has no children, there are some shadows in the palace in the winter. Compared with the palace corridors and bridges that look like leviathans, a palace made of 2 or 3 on foot looks very small. From a distance, it is just a small dot moving slowly on the white stone avenue. The tallest building in the imperial city is the Tewa Golden Palace, and on the eaves at the top of the Golden Palace, there is a thin old eunuch, with his hands folded and his sleeves half squinted, like an auspicious beast carved on the roof of the Golden Palace, motionless. After watching the chariot enter the Yongle Palace, the old eunuch in red robe disappeared silently at the top of the Golden Palace. After a few ups and downs, he came to the outside of the emperor's imperial study room and looked at the silhouette of the figure coming out of the window. Bow slightly. Your Majesty, Crown Prince Su has gone to Yongle Palace. The light in the imperial study room was relatively dim, with only a green lamp burning in front of the imperial desk, and 3 sticks of incense burning under the portrait of the woman on the wall. Songji, dressed in regular clothes, sat in front of the imperial desk, looking at a poem manuscript in his hand, with a little tenderness in his eyes, as if reminiscing about the past. Hearing eunuch Jia's voice, Songji came back to his senses, put down his poem manuscript, and said calmly, "Come here as you come. My mother has never been in charge of the Xiao family, and she doesn't know much about government affairs. Maybe she just stayed in the palace for a long time and wanted to find someone to chat with." Eunuch Jia nodded slowly, hesitated for a moment, and said softly, "Concubine Xian and concubine Shu also stayed in the palace for a long time. This is also a kind reminder. The queen died of illness a few years ago, and Songji did not have a queen. Although there were 2 princes, the birth of the mother and concubine was not too good to have a queen, so she was considered a concubine. Concubine Xian and concubine Shu came from prominent families. After giving birth to children, they could naturally be crowned princes and give reassurance to the courtiers, so that the civil and military officials of the court would not wonder who they should assist in the future. It was a pity that Songji in the imperial study did not instruct eunuch Jia to inform the 2 waiting concubines to go to bed. After a moment of silence, a soft voice suddenly came out. 10 years of life and death are vast, without thinking, and unforgettable. A lonely grave thousands of miles away, no place to talk about desolation. Even if we meet, we should not know each other, our faces covered with dust, and our temples are like frost. At night, I have a deep dream and suddenly I return home, and I am dressing up by the small window. We looked at each other without words, only 1,000 lines of tears." Songji's voice was originally calm and thick, but now it had a bit of vibrato. By the end of the sentence, the sound was no longer audible, and only a faint sigh remained. Eunuch Jia narrowed his eyes slightly. He had been with the emperor for many years, so he knew what Songji was thinking of. He was silent for a moment, bowed and sighed. "Your Majesty, this poem is unique in the world." "Yes." In the imperial study room, Songji looked at the picture scroll on the wall with a calm face, tapped his fingers on the table, and remained silent for a long time before continuing, "She used to like poetry, but it's a pity that my poetry is mediocre, and I usually play the piano to others." Eunuch Jia shook his head, "Your Majesty, please relax. This old slave has served 3 kings one after another. Some things have faded away over time. The literary style of this poem is transcendent, but there is a bit of sadness in the lines between the spring and the autumn feeling, a bit petty, not like what a man would do." This statement can be regarded as persuading Songji not to fall into the sorrow of losing his wife. As an emperor, he is a loner, how can he miss the love in the world of mortals? There was only a moment of silence in the royal study, and then Songji's voice sounded again. "When I was drunk, I lit up the lamp to read the sword, and dreamed back to the battalion of blowing horns. 800 miles away, my subordinates were burning, 50 strings were heard outside the Great Wall, and the soldiers were ordered in the autumn of the battlefield. Lu's horse was so fast, and his bow was like a thunderbolt. The king of the world was over. It was a pity that everything happened in vain. Isn't this a petty thing? Eunuch Jia was stunned and stood under the window thinking for a long time. Delu should be the name of a horse. I have never heard of such a good horse. Are these two poems written by one person? On a poem manuscript, I'm afraid it is, but there is no name. These two poems alone are worthy of the word talented. Is it possible that under my rule, there are still pearls covered in dust in Chang'an City? Scholar. After Songji succeeded to the throne, he attached great importance to poor families, otherwise he would not have allowed the great scholar to hold a poetry meeting and personally taste the poems. It is difficult to get ahead in Chang'an City, but it is even more difficult to get ahead if you have real ability. Eunuch Jia thought about it for a while. There are hundreds of thousands of households in Chang'an, and there are countless people from all over the world who come to Beijing to seek fame. Since this person has handed in the poem manuscript, there is no news in the market. He probably wants to be famous, and is waiting for the Holy Spirit to open the gold. Look for him. Most of the hermits who are masters have this air. If they come to the door by themselves, they will feel that their status has been degraded. People who are really capable will probably have to come and invite him 3 or 4 times before they can leave the mountain. Otherwise, how can they be called masters? Songji chuckled lightly and said calmly, how can I care about lowering my stature for a capable minister and famous person? I am afraid that this person has poetic talent but no practical knowledge, which will make me happy. Eunuch Jia slowly shook his head. There have been stories about standing up a pole for faith and buying horse bones with 1,000 pieces of gold. Your Majesty sincerely invites people with real talents and practical knowledge, and people with great ambitions will naturally come to accept the invitation. Songji thought about it for a moment, and quite approved of the proposal, and said, but tomorrow, after the court meeting is over, we will prepare a banquet for all the ministers. They will say that I have a good talent, Long Yan, and I am very happy. If I get to know that old man tomorrow, he will scold me for playing with things and losing my ambition. It shouldn't be like this. For the sake of 3 poems, if you go to war, your reputation will spread. Eunuch Jia bowed his head. No. There are 3 poems. Withered vines, old trees and dim crows, small bridges and flowing water, people's homes, the west wind and thin horses on the ancient roads. The sun sets in the west, and the heartbroken people are at the end of the world. Well, several of this person's poems vividly display the concept of depression and lack of ambition. If it is really written by one person, his talent cannot be underestimated, but he may be a little older. Zhang Zia still worships the Prime Minister at an old age. Age is not a problem, but I am afraid that he has no real ability.